Uh, no, not really. I think that it's more of like a game face kind of thing. Like it's more like, when you're on the drive over there and you're thinking like, okay, I know what I need to ask this guy. You know, it's sort of like I've competed in sports my whole life, in powerlifting and football, baseball, like all sorts of different sports, and it was sort of like getting ready for that big lift or getting ready for that thing was like you do get a little nervous. You get that sort of like butterflies, kind of feeling like, okay, I gotta ask this guy about, he's saying, when he's telling me like our problem isn't with Lexapro, our problem is with steroids. You have to ask those questions. You have to like, get in there and ask him. With Henry Waxman, it was kind of weird because it was a completely different thing. It was the first congressman I ever interviewed, and I was like, I'm just some kid from Poughkeepsie, going out with a cheap camera and like going to interview this congressman, and like he doesn't know what this is for and whatever. And I walked out of the room and I thought it was a complete failure because I said to my producers, I said, I completely failed. I'm sorry that I let you guys down. I mean, like, I don't know, man. That guy just didn't really know anything. I don't know what we're gonna do with that besides trash it. And then they were like, I know. It's just like it's one of those weird things. Like we don't know either, whatever. And we didn't even think about like watching it back. And then we were just sending all the footage back to LA. And our editors, one of our editors, Kurt Engfer, was kind of post-production supervisor, and he was the editor on Fahrenheit 9/11 and Bowling for Columbine. And if you look at like all the genius, like funny, great moments in those movies, they were probably Kurt's moments. And Kurt watched the interview in whole with our editor, and all he did was just cut it down. He goes, I took this, 20-minute interview and I made it 2 minutes. And he's like, just watch it. And we watched it and we're like, oh my God, this is hilarious. And Kurt is like, isn't it golden what you can do by just like, he's like, we're not even, because I felt like bad manipulating footage. Like one thing I didn't want to do in this documentary was ever manipulate footage, like put things in order that they didn't belong or in places where they didn't belong. But in that case, we didn't manipulate anything, and it was just, came out the way it came out, and we just shortened it, basically. And I don't know, sometimes you get lucky, when you make a documentary. But I think that the other question was, you just have to know what you're going to ask, and you have to know your material. And if you're going to go make a documentary, a couple of times I felt like I didn't have the material straight in my head enough to really like nail somebody back on something. So I think that's, a couple of examples, like you said, is there anything you maybe wanted in the film? There's probably a couple instances where I could have like really nailed somebody on something pretty hardcore, and I didn't, maybe just know the information well enough, or didn't have like one certain fact. But that's why you have to have your researchers have your back, and like 9 times out of 10 I did have the facts or whatever. But the one point I think that was that's interesting is if you actually watch the film and dissect it and break it down, it's always these things like when you talk to Carl Lewis, you say, well, some people would say that maybe they should strip you of the medal, and maybe you should go to the guy in, the next place down. I'm not saying that. Some people may say that, so when you talk to somebody, it's all on how you talk to them and how you approach them and how you even ask them to be in the documentary in the first place. With Carl Lewis, it was basically an approach of like, we are such big fans of yours. We think you're awesome. We think Ben Johnson used steroids and he was the ultimate cheater. And we want to ask you about that asshole. Can you please comment on it? And he's like, absolutely. I'll be there. Santa Monica track. You tell me what time. And so he didn't know we were going to ask him the flip side of the coin there. But I think if you're asked to be interviewed as a professor, or if you ask somebody, you should always be prepared for the hard questions to be there and how to answer them. And that's what PR people are for. That's what PR people get paid a lot of money for, and that's what I think you guys are kind of learning in this course as well. The spin. Go for it.
I was just wondering, what was like your motivation for doing this film?
The motivation behind doing the film really was, and I think my dad can attest to this, is just, moving to LA and just wanting to be a filmmaker really bad, and trying to do everything, and writing scripts, and just countless, time after time, just, not being in the right place at the right time. And then all of a sudden, people start writing books about steroids, and steroids start popping up in the news, and at the same time I'm pitching this documentary to a friend of mine who had just happened to walk into Gold's Gym, who I used to go to USC with, who produced my short film, who said, "You know what, Chris, this is a great idea. Let's take this and let's start working on it." And it was us being in the right place at the right time, meeting the right people at the right time, forming the right team at the right time. So the motivation was always there. As far as like I went to USC Film School, and I graduated in 1997 and didn't get my first feature made until it came out in January 2008. So if you look at the span of 10 years, my dad actually told me anything you want to do in life is going to take you 10 years. So just remember. So from the time I wanted to be a filmmaker to the time my movie came out in Sundance was like 10 years, pretty much exactly. So it's a pretty good call.